Something that is usually pretty underrated when it comes to pretty much any game out there is definitely the side quests. The side quests of a game can really add a lot of additional gameplay to the game, or really just drag on elements of the game that you really don't want to play. However, Final Fantasy 16, honestly, I think one of the more shining moments of the game is definitely the side quests, because one of my biggest complaints when it comes to side quests is the fact that they really don't add a lot of additional interesting story details to the game. However, Final Fantasy 16 really does a fantastic job at doing just that, even to the extent of going to some really dark places. And that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of Nerd Space, guys, because we're going to take a look at the 10 most messed up side quests in Final Fantasy 16. Also, before we get started, let me remind you guys, we are going to be diving down into spoiler territory, as we're going to have to talk about these side quests and the storylines following them. And some of it does touch into the main story of the entire game. So if you haven't beat Final Fantasy 16, or you haven't completed all the side quests and you want to remain surprised when you go complete these side quests, then I suggest holding off on watching this video until after you finish those side quests. But otherwise, let's jump straight into it, guys. Number 10, moving heaven and earth. So on paper, this side quest actually doesn't seem too messed up. I mean, when you think about it, it's supposed to be for the good of the hideaway. So after speaking to the chief botanist, you find out that he sent his assistant Martel over to collect some samples of soil for his research. And after speaking with him, it seems like he's kind of worried about her. So he gives you the location of where he sent her and sends you on your way to go collect her and make sure she's okay. Well, when you end up finding her, she is being attacked by a bunch of giant spiders. And of course, you being the amazing, fantastic person that you are, you have to save her and save the day and rescue Martel from the spiders. After rescuing Martel, she tells you where you can collect the samples of soil. So you go collect the samples of soil, and you and Martel return back to the hideaway. And after thinking that the chief botanist will be extremely excited and happy to hear that Martel is safe and sound and has returned to the hideaway and he's not to blame for her death, it doesn't go down exactly how you might expect, because he wasn't at all concerned for Martel in the slightest. The only concern he had was for his own personal research. So Martel dying, honestly, meant nothing to him. If she would have not made it back, as long as the soil samples made it back, that's all he cared about. If she died while going on this journey to collect the soil samples, whatever, it's a loss for the greater good. And while Martel is kind of content with this fact, because she knows that the research he's doing is valuable to the hideaway, it still doesn't make it any better that this guy was not even sad or even concerned or upset about the fact that Martel could be dead. But hey, it did turn out that some really nice apples were made, so we're good. All is well and good in the world now.
That fucking snake played me false, acted like he was one of us, and the whole time he was one of them. We need him caught and handed over to the Imperials. Hanging's too good for him.
Number 9, false friends. So as the title of this side quest suggests, maybe your closest and best friends may not be the type of people you should keep around your close-knit circle, because as it turns out, the moment something is revealed about yourself that they don't like, they'll drop you in a second. And that is exactly what we see with this side quest. Norris is a bear who is hiding his true abilities. Being a bear is pretty much the biggest sin in the Final Fantasy 16 world, because all of these people are shunned and treated like slaves and treated harshly throughout this game if you are a bear. Hence why Norris felt the need to hide this from everybody. Well, as it turns out, he ends up accidentally revealing himself around his closest friends. And thinking that, you know, hey, they're his closest friends, they probably won't say anything or rat him out. No, that's not what happens at all. Turns out that they are immediately turned against him and ready to kill him or turn him in so he can be lynched. So, of course, now that his own best friends are turning against him and trying to kill him, he decides to run away before he gets caught. And of course, he goes and puts himself in more danger, potentially running into other monsters and creatures out there in the world. Luckily for Norris, one of his friends turned out to be a true good friend and actually reaches out to Clive to help rescue him. And between the two of them, they were able to rescue Norris, disguise the fact that he was killed and is dead, and allow the man to move on and live out his life. Number 8, Duty Undying 1. So I was going to include both portions of Duty Undying, but I decided not to because I feel like the second one isn't as bad and it's definitely nowhere near as messed up as the first portion. However, this part 1 of this is pretty messed up. So let's jump straight into it. So depending on how you look at the side quest, it might not be as messed up as some of the ones on this list because the people in this situation chose their own fate. So I guess it's a little bit more understanding and not as messed up as some of the other quests on this list. Basically, you start this quest by speaking to Cyril, who is pretty much the leader of the Undying, which is pretty much a secret organization tasked with protecting the Phoenix at all costs and doing whatever the Phoenix asks of them, no matter what the cost is. Now, this is where I kind of dive down a little bit into spoiler territory, as Joshua is the one that has tasked them with gathering information on the main villain of the game, Ultima. And while Joshua definitely didn't intend them to go as far as they go with this quest, they actually do whatever it takes to get the information that Joshua needs, to the point where they kind of sacrifice half of their own people. So like I mentioned, Cyril's the leader of the Undying, and because Joshua has asked the Undying group to find information on Ultima, they learn that there might be some information hidden in some ruins. So because of that, the Undying sends a bunch of researchers to go check it out and see what they can find. Well, long and behold, when they show up, there's a lot of Fallen there, which are enemies that are usually found near ruins of the Fallen, of course. But instead of doing the smart thing and teaming up together to fight the Fallen or retreating and trying to get help on disposing of them, they thought it's a better idea to sacrifice half of their team while the other half conducts their research and gets the information that Joshua wants. So despite being close friends and a close-knit group, they said, fuck you guys. And when Clive does return after learning this information, he goes to Cyril and talks to Cyril how this is not what Joshua wanted. Cyril kind of just pushes it off, saying, hey, this is what we want though. And while that kind of helps make the situation a little less fucked up, it's still kind of surprising how fast they were to sacrifice half of their men just for a little bit of information that turned out to be not valuable at all, really, honestly. Number 7, Live and Let Live. So this one is actually a really unique side quest for this list because it actually doesn't really deal with people dying or betrayal or anything like that. Yet it's still on this list. So throughout the game of Final Fantasy XVI, one of the most common enemies that you fight are goblins. They're pretty much all over Valisthea. And from the very first moment you face off against goblins, all the way back in the demo and the prologue of the game, you are led to believe that they are pretty much savage, mindless creatures that all they care about is just murdering and destroying things around them. Now, what if you take that mindset after killing hundreds of goblins throughout Valisthea and it say, you know what, let's turn it on its head. Let's turn that upside down, because guess what? They are just like us humans. And that's what Live and Let Live kind of did for us. So you start this side quest over in Baklad, but one of the porters of the city is worried about a sellsword that she sent over to go handle a specific situation, a thief problem that's going on, and he hasn't returned. So of course you go and do some research and you find him, and he's actually in a goblin village of some sort. Yet he stops you before you actually murder the goblins. And it's because these goblins are just like humans. They're just trying to live. They're just trying to get by. They're not trying to cause any harm with anybody. They're not attacking people. They just want to live on their own and get by. And this sellsword is actually trying to train them and teach them on how they can live without stealing. And what's so messed up about this situation is that all of this time you think that these goblins are just monsters or just creatures that are just roaming around Valisthea, attacking everybody, killing everybody, stealing their stuff. Yet here you are, you have a sellsword that is actually training these goblins, and now it makes you rethink all of those goblins you killed. A lot of them might have just been protecting their home or just not bothering anybody at all. I think back to the prologue, whenever you went out of your way to hunt down goblins that were over by the blight. They weren't messing with anybody, and yes, they were close, but they weren't actually coming into your capital city. They weren't attacking people in this city, yet you decide to go out of your way to kill them all, and it makes you look like such a horrible person. Let me tell you, if you haven't did the side quest yet, this might be one that you might not want to do, because it might make you regret killing goblins that you have been doing throughout the entire game. And honestly, it might make you not want to kill any more goblins, because after I did this side quest, I kind of ran past any goblins I saw because I felt bad about killing them now. Number 6, Line in the Sand 1. So Line in the Sand 1 deals with Lubor, who is kind of the leading figure of Dalamil. And this guy multiple times goes out of his way to protect and save this village. However, similar to False Friends, it is revealed that he actually has abilities, which means he's a bearer. But unfortunately, once again, for Valisthea, this is a bad thing. This is a huge sin, especially if you've been hiding it for all of this time. But what's even more messed up, the reason why he reveals himself is because he does it to try to save 2 kids that are in trouble and being attacked by bandits. That is why he reveals himself. And instead of the people like seeing the goodness in him and seeing everything good that he has done for this village, including sacrificing his livelihood because he revealed himself by saving these 2 orphans, they immediately turn on him and start calling him names and start saying that he needs to be kicked out of the village because he's a bear, and that they hate him because he's lied to them for all this time. And while I can understand about the lying aspect, when you see how they immediately turn on him, you kind of understand why he lied all this time. So it's a really sad moment whenever this guy who's given his all, his everything, his whole livelihood just to protect the people he loves and cares about, just to see all of those same exact people turn on him and immediately shun him no matter what he has done for this village. It's a messed up situation, and honestly, I was kind of in tears just watching it play out. I'm glad we got the second portion of this side quest, because Lines in the Sand 2 kind of sets this right. I won't dive too much into it, but it does end with a really good conclusion to his story, and thankfully it didn't end on that note that the first part of the side quest ended on. So number 5, Playthings. So honestly, these next 5, this top 5 is probably the worst of the worst, because guys, it gets pretty intense for how messed up these storylines are. Honestly, if you have a weak heart, now might be the time to kind of turn away, because for the rest of these side quests, all of them really it's not good. It's not good at all, especially the top 3. But let's talk about Playthings. So Playthings is probably one of the first side quests, along with one other that we'll talk about later, that you actually learn how normal people around the world treat the bears and the true extent of what these bears are treated like. And it really shows the sins of the parents moving on to the kids, and it's dark, guys. So you meet Lizette, who is a little girl trying to find her pet, Chloe. And you can tell she's really upset because she really wants her pet. So once again, of course, Clive, being the good doer that he is, he decides to help Lizette find her pet. Well, this is where it gets pretty messed up, because it turns out that Chloe isn't some dog or cat like you might think she is. No. It is much worse, because as it turns out, Chloe isn't a dog or a cat. She is a human being. She's a human being. And the reason why she calls her pet is because her parents taught her that bears are pets. They should be treated just like pets are, or actually kind of worse than how pets are treated. But of course, Clive doesn't know this, so he's searching around for a dog and sees the dog barking. So he decides to go check it out and see what's going on with this dog. But it's not a dog with white hair, so it can't be who Lizette was talking about. But the dog was barking at a human dead body who has white hair. And as it turns out, this is Chloe. Chloe is dead. And we learned that pretty much this isn't the first Chloe that Lizette has had. Her parents always gives her the weak bears that can no longer work and use magic because they are near the end of their life from using magic too much. And each time they get weak like that, they give her one of these bears. And instead of crying and being sad about Chloe being dead, no. She keeps yelling at Chloe saying, get up, I'm not done with you, get up. Ultimately, it kind of reminds me of an article I read that explains this situation similar to how Ramsay treated Reek in Game of Thrones. I believe that was on Game Rant. Check that article out because it's a perfect example of this situation. Talk about really bad parenting. Number 4, For Great Justice 2. So you can kind of combine For Great Justice 1 and 2 together, but for the most part, I'm talking about For Great Justice 2 because that's the one that really stands out to me as pretty messed up. So Quentin is the innkeeper and pretty much the leader of the village Lost Wing. He created Lost Wing from scratch, and it seems like he was a good person, as he helped many bears become free and helped them join his village, and had so many people join him that were on the run or in need of help. Well, as it turns out, Quentin is not as great of a guy as you might think he is, because it is revealed through this side quest that the reason why he does all of this is specifically to build an army to fight against the Chief of Justice of Sombrek, so that way he can get revenge on his family. And while I understand the whole aspect of wanting to get revenge on the person that killed your family, putting a whole village of people at risk, bringing them just to fight your war and get your own revenge is pretty messed up. And of course, they are all willing to do this. As a matter of fact, they devote themselves to Quentin because of the life he gave them. It still doesn't change the fact that what he was doing was pretty messed up, honestly. And most of these people are bears, so of course they're used to really messed up situations, and what Quentin did for them, to them, probably is like handing them gold, despite being used for his own purposes. But it doesn't end there, because you learn that information in the first part of the side quest in For Great Justice 1. For Great Justice 2 is where it gets really bad, because Quentin decides to gather all these people and finally go and get his revenge. And he leads all of these men and women into battle to fight against the Chief of Justice and get his revenge. Well, of course, things don't always go according to plan in Final Fantasy 16 because he leads them all into a vicious trap where literally every single one of them dies, with the exception of himself. All of them. Luckily, he didn't bring the kids or the weaker members of his village, but he did get the rest of the village killed, including some of the best warriors that could have defended the village in future attacks from the Akashik. And you would think that maybe he might learn from this after seeing all of his people killed brutally. No, it ends with him still wanting to get his revenge, so he goes inside the house and comes out after torturing the hell out of this guy. As much as the Chief of Justice deserved everything that he got, was it really worth the death of most of the civilians of Lost Wing? I gotta say, I disagree with that situation, and actually, Quentin, out of all the main side characters of Valisthea, I think Quentin is actually the most fucked up one. And he gets some redemption later on with some other side quests, but hey, it does not redeem him for sacrificing most of his village just for the sake of revenge. Number 3, All Bark. So if you thought Playthings was pretty messed up with the whole parenting situation with Lizette and how she pretty much thinks of the bears as nothing more than maybe toys, well, it gets much worse, especially when it comes to this type of parenting. So in All Bark, Clive is heading down a path and he's called by someone on the street who assumes that this bear, Clive, was sent to help him rescue his son, that he called for a bear to come to him so that way he can get help to save his son, because his son is being attacked by a wolf. So the dad tells Clive where his son is, and the wolf is attacking his son. Meanwhile, the dad's not doing anything, so it's already suspicious enough, because instead of the dad trying to save the son, he's just like, hey, yeah, my son, he's in trouble all the way over there. You should go help him. Please save him. Oh my gosh. Well, Clive goes over there, helps him, and it turns out that it's a wolf that's attacking him, so he kills the wolf. Surprisingly, the son is pretty dissatisfied with this and very unhappy, as it turns out that this is his pet. This wolf is actually a wolf that they train to do this because they want the wolf to mimic attacking him, so that way when the bear comes that they hired, they can send the bear over to him to try to save him, only to be killed by the wolf, and the kid can laugh and enjoy it with his father as this wolf tears apart this bear. Yeah, it's pretty messed up. And of course, Clive tries to reason with them, saying how messed up this is, how wrong this is. But because of how messed up this world is, they don't really care. And instead, they think the right thing to do is to go get a new wolf, train a new wolf, and continue the process again. So Clive finds the bodies of the bear that were killed during this playtime event with the kid and his father. And he finds this other guy, and they both bury these bears. Well, next thing you know, you hear in the distance the father and son being killed and ripped apart by a wolf that they decided to try to get and train again to continue their horrifying hobby. And while I wish I can say they got what they deserved, the fact of the matter is, this is still a kid. And this kid was just ripped apart by a wolf. So despite not having the body count that For Great Justice did, with Quentin sacrificing a whole village of people, it definitely was one of the darkest moments of Final Fantasy 16, where people were sent to die, and then a kid gets ripped apart by a wolf. So number 2, Litany of Errors. So I almost put this at number 1 just because it mainly focuses on children, and it's really insane about how these children are treated. First off, these children, of course, like a reoccurring theme throughout Valisthea and with all of the side quests that are pretty messed up, these children are bearers. Most of them were pretty much given to these people from their own parents because they are bearers, and they were taken from those homes and brought to this place, which is kind of similar to an orphanage, but much more messed up, guys. So basically, these bears were supposed to be trained and created as soldiers for Waloed. But it gets much worse because you learn more about how these children were treated thanks to some of the documents located in this place. First off, each of these children pretty much had a exercise that they had to go through every single day, basically. They had the press yard, which some probably had to deal with carrying 20 sandbags for a duration that the instructor dictated. The furnace, which pretty much they had to be subjected to the fire and burn intensity, and it will continue to increase and increase until they hit their limits. Then they had to go into a live combat against a hellhound, and depending on the performance with the hellhound, they might be seen as weak and disposable by the army, so they wouldn't keep the children. There was no point keeping them around if they weren't strong enough to be soldiers in the army. So children were raised to be soldiers all the way up to their breaking point, and if they couldn't surpass that breaking point, they were killed and put down like animals, like beasts. And there's really not too much of a happy ending with the side quest. You see the guy who was pretty much in charge of this place killing himself, at least, maybe, because we don't really get confirmation of that, I think, because he was in a Akashic, so for all we know, he might have stayed alive and didn't actually go through with killing himself, but instead just got turned into a Akashic. And then you get the registry, and you get to bring it back to Herman, who wants to remember the names of the people that fell. But all that really does, in my opinion, just shows how many children were killed in this situation and makes the moment even sadder. It's despicable and horrible, and it's definitely one of the most messed up side quests throughout this game. And I can understand why people might put this as number 1, but in my opinion, it's about to get a lot worse. Number 1, Nobody's Tool. So a side character that doesn't get a lot of recognition and isn't really front and center for most of the game unless you do this side quest is Doris, and she's the captain of the Cursebreakers. She's the leader of the Cursebreakers. However, you get to learn more about her backstory after you do a few different side quests, which for the most part, none of them are really that bad, and actually a lot of them are good. However, her final side quest is when things turn a turn for the darkest moment of this game, in my opinion, at least when it comes to side quests, and that is with the side quest Nobody's Tool. So she pretty much tells you the story of someone she was really close to that was also a bear working with the same master, and that when they escaped, they both had to go different ways in order to avoid getting caught, because if they stayed together, they were more likely to be recognized. So they had to split up, and she hasn't seen him since. Well, then she gets a sign that she knows where he is, and apparently he might be in this prison over in Waloed. But Waloed is pretty much all Akashic, which means the likeliness of this guy still being alive is already pretty bad. But let me tell you, you still have no idea what to expect and what you're in for until you get to this prison. Because when you get to this prison, you learn the backstory of the prison and what happened here. And as it turns out, similar to the story with Litany of Errors, you had people that were being used, bears that were being used regardless of their age. They might be really young, they might be extremely old. They were pretty much being used as training subjects for a monster within the prison that they were trying to train and use as a weapon against their enemies. So basically what would happen is that they would take a bear, regardless of how weak or how strong they are, or how young they are, throw them into the arena to battle this creature, and this creature would literally brutally murder them and eat them, and they would continue battling this creature until they died, basically. What makes this more brutal and messed up is that you find a small girl, a very young girl, who is the sole survivor of this prison, and you learn that she wasn't the only kid. There was kids in here that were being forced to fight against this beast and being ripped apart. Innocent kids being ripped apart by this beast. That's how gruesome and horrible this prison was. You do learn, of course, that the friend of Doris actually staged a rebellion and helped try to get everybody to escape and save them when everything went to hell. But ultimately, he ended up dying trying to protect the little girl, and the little girl ended up being the sole survivor of the incident.
Bearers die every day in service of their masters, but this is so much worse. Pitting bearers against a wild beast armed with nothing but their wits? And all in order to bring about more death. And not just those who could fight, but the elderly, children even. And those who wouldn't or couldn't were disposed of. Whatever that means.
I'm afraid it means they were fed to the monstrosity they kept here.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Nerd Space. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in on this episode of Nerd Space. It's been really great having you guys around. Let me know what storyline in any of these side quests you guys think was the worst and most heartbreaking and most messed up, honestly. But as always, guys, I'll see you on the next Nerd Space. Take care.